afternoon. My name is Roy Shelton. I am a proud alumni of the University of Michigan School of Social Work. I am an African-American man wearing a blue button-up shirt and glasses, and it's my pleasure to be here this afternoon. I would like to personally welcome you to this year's conference toward an anti-ableist academy, advancing inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility at the University of Michigan. Throughout the month of October, this conference includes 11 online sessions, each between 60 or 90 minutes, as part of the Disability Community Month activities. These 11 sessions focus on the progress made and work still to be done on recommendations to close accessibility gaps across campus for disabled students, faculty, and staff here at the University of Michigan. I was blessed to be a part of the idea board, and my role was to lead a group and have some input as far as we develop the disability accessibility plan here at the University of Michigan. I'm pleased to welcome you to the Disability Studies Futures at U of M presented, and I would like to welcome Dr. Adams to this panel.
Thanks so much, Lloyd, for your thoughtful words, your work on the idea board, mentorship, and continuous support for all disabled persons in our community. And thanks for everybody for joining us today. I'm Robert Adams. I identify as disabled. I'm an associate professor of architecture in Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning, and I also am the director of the University of Michigan Initiative on Disability Studies. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm a white male with brown and gray hair and a beard, wearing a blue shirt and clear glasses. My background today is actually a nice drawing of an 18th century skyscape. So before we introduce ourselves, as is the custom of our people, thanks to the land and territorial nation of the Anishinaabe people now occupied by the university, and everyone who's helping to make this event as accessible as possible, including Kate Miller for card captioning in real time, Malala Boyce and Yakata Nichols for American Sign Language English interpreting, for event production by Adriana Conejo. And I always like to thank the labor of digital infrastructure, all that stuff that's working in the background to take us from Ann Arbor, the university, to San Jose, where I think Zoom is based, and somehow network us all together in what we hope is a spirited conversation. A special thank you to Dr. Sellers, Dr. Das, and Pam McGitty in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the organizational support of the symposium, and to the members of the IDEA board, this amazing board of students, faculty, staff, administrators, who over a 2-year period worked extremely hard to make the university more aware of the value that disability culture brings to our academic community. Also, as the custom in a lot of the disability studies courses that we teach, feel free to post things in the chat. You can take a nap if you're feeling tired today. You can check your phone. Please feel to eat and drink and take care of yourself throughout this session. It's an hour long, and we really haven't built into it a proper break, so I apologize for that. Building on the enthusiasm of Dr. Okanlami's keynote address yesterday, which I thought was really it was quite profound what he was talking about, and I really appreciate his leadership. And let's say the broader institutional momentum in the space of disability culture in the university, we believe now is the right time to evolve the University of Michigan Initiative on Disability Studies, let's say from its initiative status into a new academic program in disability studies. And we're looking for your collaboration and want to invite you into that process. So hopefully today, we can give you a little bit of a sense of where that conversation is, and with your input, we can evolve that conversation into the future. So let's meet some of our panelists today. Natasha, if you could start us out, please.
My name is Natasha Abner. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Linguistics. I am a white woman with brown hair, sort of have bangs going on at the moment. And I have dark black glasses on, a sleeveless black dress, and my background is one of the U of M virtual background. It's plain green with a blue block M in the lower right corner for me, but I'm not 100% sure which side it's going to be on for you.
I suppose I'm next. I am Joshua Kupets. I'm a lecturer too in English language and literature, and I am the assistant director of the English department writing program. I am a white male. I am wearing a black and gray checked shirt with a black suit jacket over it. Behind me, my virtual background is a kind of drawing of the rotating sculpture that's in, I believe, Regent's Plaza, the cube, I couldn't remember for a moment. And I'm really grateful and glad to be here with you today.
All right, and I am next, I believe. So I'm Petra Kappes. All right, here I am. Hi there. I'm Petra Kappes. She, her. I am a white, disabled, queer woman. I come to you right now from Anishinaabe territory in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And I am a professor of performance studies and disability culture in the English and Women and Gender Studies departments. My background right now is the corner of my kitchen, and you can see the red wall and wall hangings and the corner of a beautiful nude image right behind me. So it's lovely to see you all. I'm glad to be part of it. Thank you so much.
I guess I'm next. Hi, everyone. My name is Itai. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am a lecturer in the English department, teaching courses in early American literature, disability studies, disability history, and neurodiversity. Right now, I look very pale white with dark hair. I am wearing a sweater and a collared shirt, and my background is purple. And I suppose I have nothing else to add. I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, everybody. This is Robert speaking. I also want to mention that the people that you just met are our core disability studies faculty, of which there's many people in our organization that somehow their teaching and research intersects disability. And I'd also like to mention one other person who's really important to our faculty group, and that's Remy Yergo. Remy uses they, them, theirs pronouns. They are Associate Director of the Digital Studies Institute and also Associate Professor of English Language and Literature. And Remy has played a really prominent role in elevating the conversation within our university around disability, and they will be involved, I think, in 3 different events later on this month, which you can all register for. So before we discuss the future of disability studies at Michigan, we would just like to offer you 5 takes, like 5 quick perspectives that help us understand the plurality of disability, or what is disability studies, if you're new to this kind of discourse. And we're interested in sharing with you how disability informs our teaching, our research, and our creative practices. So we'll start with Natasha, please.
Okay. Hi, this is Natasha speaking. I, as I mentioned, am an assistant professor in the linguistics department. Very, very narrowly speaking, I am a sign language researcher. However, being a sign language researcher within the field of linguistics has really led me to beneficially sort of question our theoretical ideas of what the limitations of language are. So I research sign languages as a way of better understanding human languages, but also sign languages as a way of better understanding the full scope of human communication, which includes sign language and spoken language and body language and gesture and alternative communication and all sorts of things. So I'm really excited that my ability to study sign languages from a disability-informed perspective has led me to really shift the very narrow view of language that people within linguistics frequently have. And the other thing that is mentioned here on the slide is that a lot of my work in disability justice is community oriented and outside of the academy. And I think that is really important in order to connect our campus activism to the broader quest for disability justice beyond the borders of the campus. And just to describe the picture that you see on the background there, so this is a picture that I took from a conference called Theoretical Issues in Sign Language Research. It is sort of like the conference for sign language research in the entire world. People from all sorts of fields like linguistics and psychology and education come to this conference. And the presenter on the bottom right there is a Ronice de Quadros, RONICE DEQUADROS. And she was talking about all of the deaf empowerment initiatives that have taken place in Brazil over the last decade or so. And what you see kind of obscured by the quote at the middle of the slide is a huge collage of images of all of the deaf people in Brazil who have recently gotten PhDs and gone into the academy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natasha. And also, you'll see on these images on the left-hand side, there's some citations just about current work. Would you want to say anything about this morphology and child home design?
Sure. So that, I'm waiting for spotlight again. Okay, yes, so that is actually a project. So one of the areas of my research is looking at how deaf people in the absence of a deaf community, so many deaf people have hearing families and aren't in places where conventionalized sign languages exist. So part of my research is looking at how deaf people in the absence of a deaf community innovate their own beautiful and complex gestural communication systems. And so what you see cited there on the bottom left is some recent research showing how deaf children in Nicaragua innovate these really elaborate and specific and complex ways of talking about number.
Great, thank you so much. Josh.
Hi, this is Josh Kupets speaking again. I teach primarily in the English department writing program, but I also teach occasionally the graduate course in disability studies and literary disability studies in the English department. I work on contemporary 20th century literary form and its intersection with and influenced by emergent notions of disability. You might be seeing on the screen right now an image on the left-hand side of a tea bowl that has been cracked and reassembled using gold in a process that called kintsugi that is meant to highlight the lived experience of the object and to increase the aesthetic beauty of the object by highlighting its divergence from a sort of Platonic ideal of a tea bowl. And in some ways, that image for me speaks to the way that I think about the ways that disability studies and literary studies can intersect, the ways in which divergence, sometimes minor and sometimes radical, from conventional assumptions about literary forms can create aesthetic beauty and a sense of wonder. So my work doesn't look particularly at representations of disability, but instead looks at overall textual forms, storytelling, formats and that sort of thing. Although on the right-hand side of the screen, you might see a very famous quotation by Ernest Hemingway. And that quotation comes from A Farewell to Arms. And the quotation is, "The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places." Now, this quotation, I think, is often interpreted to think about the ways in which the characters' lived experiences in Hemingway's work demonstrate a kind of breakage. But I repurpose this quotation to think about the ways in which texts themselves can be broken from conventional representations or conventional assumptions about them, and then create beauty. For the next moment or two, I'd like to talk a little bit about the ways in which disability studies can make an impact, or can make can further its impact at the university level. The first thing that's worth pointing out is that the graduate course and the literary disability studies course often attract many students from different departments across the campus. The graduate course is cross-listed with 9 departments. When I've taught English 316, literary disability studies, the room is typically filled with a range of non-English majors. I think that speaks to an awareness among our graduate and undergraduate students about the value of thinking through disability and encountering the world through lenses that disability provides. The embrace of disability studies is a direct furthering of the DEIJ agenda by foregrounding connections between disability, race, gender, and environment. I think that by intentionally building out a disability studies program here at Michigan, we can tap into the interest that already exists among our students and spread disability out of disability studies out of the more humanities-based contexts that you might have recognized in seeing the affiliation of the panelists here, and into all of the fields that we teach and research here at U of M, because disability itself provides a form of critique of those disciplinary assumptions, the foundational beliefs of the kinds of questions we ask as researchers and scholars. And it's certainly done that for my work in literature. And when we get to the discussion later, I'm sure many of us will have questions and thoughts about how that may apply in our own home disciplines. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Josh. Hi, Petra.
Hi there. Hi again, this is Petra speaking. So I have been at the University of Michigan now for about 15 years, and I've been teaching on the 580, our graduate course, since I arrived. And I had the pleasure to both co-lead UMinds with Toby Siebers, and then lead it for a while myself. And I'm now so grateful for Robert, who's been taking the lead on this for quite a few years now, and I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, and that you are bringing us all together here. So thank you, and thank you for the wide community who's here with us. So I am a community performance artist and a humanities scholar, and I work in the community. A lot of my work is outside conventional art spaces because I'm a disabled woman myself, and I have not been able to enter theaters and dance spaces and art galleries in the way that the non-disabled world often can. So I align myself with many of those who cannot enter those spaces, which includes disabled people, but also people who are not enabled to do so due to economic reasons, educational attainment, or of course, the fact that we live in a white supremacist world. So my work has always been at that interstices, at those places of those edge places where something breaks up, where a new culture might emerge. So my work is firmly located in disability culture, the arts and culture by disabled people. I'm interested in honoring body, mind, spirits. So I'm using the term body, mind, spirits to refer to the multiple ways of knowing that we embrace in disability culture. We embrace ways of thinking about the body. I'm a woman who lives with significant pain, and I know that my pain is not just something that affects my body, it affects my body, mind, spirit all dimensions of who I am. But it also means that I know how to call upon help in multiple different dimensions, including calling on my ancestors, both my German lineage, coming from a perpetrator nation that has thought long about how we can do reparative work around perpetration of violence, but also the lineage that comes from disability culture, the lineage of the disabled people who've come before me, whom I can find in complicated ways in the archive, because so many of us, of course, are not in the archives. So I call upon both of these lineages to help me live well as a disabled woman in this world. So you've already hearing that I'm expanding what counts as knowledge in the world. I'm interested in how arts-based methods can help us towards a more socially just world, one that allows us to see many different knowledges, as ways of contributing to the world. And so that's what a lot of my work is about. You'd see here on the slide an image from my current production, my current work. I'm a fellow of the New York Public Library Dance Division right now, which means that I am in the New York Public Library at Lincoln Square. And I'm in there spending time in the archive, finding traces of our crip and mad ancestors. And I'm trying to find ways of tracking people who not only identified as disabled, but who also saw an aesthetic value, a difference in their way of approaching their art forms grounded in their disability. And in order to do that, I use both traditional archival methods and I use divining methods. I use diving methods where I just go into things, see what I find, connect things up. I find these beautiful little moments that I can then take out, because I'm not really an archivist. I don't tend to hang in there for very long. I really much more enjoy being outside the library and calling together disabled and non-disabled activists in the city, and who come to me, and then we perform together those moments that I took from the archive in a ritual, in a ritual score. So the image that you see here shows you my scooter. You see the back of my scooter, which is called Scooty, and it has a yellow battery. And you see that 3 different people have their hands on the yellow battery. My collaborator, Hetty Barnhill, is in the back, a Black woman dancer. I lie on the ground. You see me so half obscured behind the chair, lying on this kind of fake green grass of New York City. And next to me is a tiny community participant who was just so taken by the choreography, by the dance that we were having there in Lincoln Center, that she just wanted to join. And both she and her dad gave me permission to use this photo. So I'm glad about that. And we are in the middle of a performance where we are, at this particular moment, we're thinking about Vincent van Gogh, you know, the painter Vincent van Gogh. And we had looked at an image of his that he created while he was a voluntary patient at an asylum in France. And he created this image, which is called the Garden of the Asylum, with these incredible color swirls that most of you know from his work. And then he has a wall in the image, and the wall is sort of a very calm, unicolor, monocolor sort of barrier in the image. So we looked at this image together as part of the score, and then we danced in these swirls, in these motions, and then assembled ourselves and grounded ourselves in one color. And for this particular instantiation of the ritual, we called for the color yellow. So everybody, boom, you know, found some yellow to touch. So our dance, we're moving all over it, and boom, went in and touched, in this case, the yellow battery of Scooty. So I love these ways of creating both knowledge in the community about disabled people who actually are able to manage themselves. Van Gogh, at this point, as far as we know, went voluntarily and knew that he was disabled, knew that he needed a different way of managing himself for a while in order to find his balance, which is very much against the idea of an artist completely out of control, you know, the usual images of madness that we know. So those are the kinds of things that I'm interested in, those little moments, these glimpses, these eggs of time where we're exploring knowledge in new ways. So let's see, the other thing that's on the slide here is, it's kind of pretty small on the left there, but you can see my other work, the book productions. I am a writer, so I write both poetry and, okay, so this is something came up in the chat. I'm looking at in a minute. And one of my books, the new book that's coming up now in January is called Ecosoma, Pain and Joy in Speculative Performance Encounters. And it looks at performance studies, approaches, and disability culture approaches to performing, looking at art practice, looking at performance practice from a disabled viewpoint. What does it mean to be a disabled writer? And one that sees the contradictions between how a performance encounter might make me feel somatically inside my own body, in tension with the kind of sociocultural knowledges that surround that performance. You know, I'm really interested in those moments of contradictions, of joy that also holds pain, of exclusions, pain of historic and ongoing oppression and violence, which holds all of that together so that we can live through it and work through it together. Okay. And
Thank you. Thank you so much, Petra.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm always just so struck by, like a few weeks ago, I was driving to the grocery store and sitting in the parking lot of Kroger, and I was listening to Michigan Public Radio, and all of a sudden I heard Petra's voice on the radio. And Petra was doing a reading from the Gut Botany, this exquisite poem. And I'm always just struck about how there's a kind of tonal resonance in your work and the way that you talk about things that I find I'm really drawn into it. But then the subject matters that you engage, like trauma and the deep history of trauma, are so intensely visceral for me at the same time that I think you're really somebody who's guiding us into this space of how do we repair the damage that certain people have waged against other people, and how human disqualification is something that, you know, it perpetuates into the 21st century for sure. And so I think finding ways to creatively work around that are really, really important.
Thank you so much, Robert.
Itai, hi.
Hi there. Well, okay, I'm going to dive into the archive where I normally live. So while Petra is doing this amazing work above ground, I'm buried in an archive in a stack somewhere. And my work tries to recover ways of thinking about mental ability and disability and health that were eclipsed by the concept of intelligence in the late 19th century, eclipsed by the medicalization of intellectual ability and disability and mental illness at the end of the 19th century. So I look primarily at 18th and 19th century and earlier sources to sort of uncover what ways of imagining human variety may have existed and may still exist in different pockets that are outside the realm of the kind of medical interpretation of body minds. So I have a lot of text on this image. I feel a little bit ashamed that I'm so verbose, but the image that I have put up here is an old painting from the late 19th century of a woman who was considered a seer or a prophet, the seeress of Prevorst. And it's a painting by someone named Gabriel von Max, who never met her. And this is very posthumous. She died in the 1820s, and this painting was made in the 1890s. It depicts a woman leaning back against a pile of white pillows. She's either asleep or in deep meditation. Her hands are facing upward by her side as she meditates. She seems illuminated by some kind of light source that is focused on her head and her kind of ethereal and pure white headscarf and pillows behind her. And on her lap is a diagram that she drew depicting where she felt the presence of spirits and ghosts around her. And this image can be found in a book that popularized her story by a doctor named Justinus Kerner, that was extremely popular and widely read, including by the American Margaret Fuller, who gave it a very positive review. And why I kind of wanted to present this image is that I believe that it affords us access to ways of interpreting different experiences that people might have had that today we would probably dismiss as instances of mental illness. But at the time that they happened, people, including the seeress, actually interpreted in different ways, and were really busy thinking about, is there a truth that we can access that we do not yet have the language for, that we do not know quite how to describe? It may be that there are ghosts and spirits out there. It may be that she is accessing something else, but this kind of ambiguity, this agnosticism about her experience is something that I believe we can learn from. And I think we've kind of lost a valuable piece of what it means to be a human by kind of dismissing this and medicalizing it altogether. So I do believe that disability studies has this ability to challenge long-standing assumptions about what makes us human and what makes us intelligent. I kind of wrote here that it's a challenge to capacity, mastery, and ability as tenable criteria for human thriving and inclusion. It's an exploration of the many ways of comprehending, sensing, and moving through the world, and the wisdom that those different ways of moving through the world produce. It's a dive into the difficult, intractable, and unruly reality on the other side of ableist anxiety. So something that I kind of bring up quite a bit in my classes, and I teach Intro to Disability Studies and Neurodiversity and other classes. I usually bring up the kind of overwhelming pressure that ableism actually exerts on everyone's life, and how we can think outside of that anxiety, that fear of disability. So in keeping with my interest in the past, one of my courses that I'm going to offer next semester is called Disabilities Past. And it will culminate with a student-produced exhibit at the Clements Library on disability history, featuring new material that is being purchased by the library. And I'm very, very excited to kind of help my students make a historiographical intervention, hopefully expand outward beyond Eurocentric Anglo-American sources into histories of disability that touch on African-American experiences, historically, and Indigenous American experiences. So that's something that I hope to achieve. And my work, I have a book in progress, American Intelligences, Varieties of Mind Before IQ, which I somewhat described to you, and an article I've written is on what I would consider the first articulation of a neurodiversity idea in Robert Montgomery Bird's book, Shepherd Lee. It's a novel published in the 1830s. So is there anything else that I've missed? I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Epak.
Thanks.
This is Robert speaking, and this is the fifth of 5 takes. So I'm primarily interested, well, let me describe this image for you. So the image that you're looking at is a photograph from an architectural model. And it's a project that I designed with a number of different collaborators. And the short version of it is it's a tricked out wheelchair ramp. And the idea was to throw a lot of design energy at a piece of civic infrastructure that never really gets designed. So if you just call up in your memory bank of spaces that you've encountered, let's say on campus. So I'm thinking of the wheelchair ramp that's at Rackham, this really amazing building on campus. And that wheelchair ramp is kind of tucked away to the side. There's some landscape shrubs and greenery that's growing in front of it. And there's a lot of effort, I think, both to make spaces accessible, which is fantastic, but also to hide that accessibility to a broader public. And this project called the Asclepius machine, so named for the Greek god of the medical arts, was really trying to aim design at an institution that I've had a lot of interaction with. A lot of it's been really good, and a lot of it's been really traumatic, to refer to some of Petra's work, and that's with the medical industrial complex. So I'm really interested in the relationship between disability, health broadly speaking, cultures of health broadly speaking, and how institutions really wind up or wind down the presence of disability in their certain spheres. So as an architect and designer, I'm primarily interested in the question of like what the process of making, unmaking, and remaking tells us about the cultures we wish to build, and also the worlds that we wish to care for and live within. So I would say that disability is designed. It's designed with absolute intentionality and clarity of mission. And I don't mean that's always good. I usually mean that that's part of a more systemic process of human disqualification. And through design and through the work I do with students and other collaborators, I'm really interested in flipping that script. So how do we create spaces when we talk about things like safe space or inclusive space? We don't really have physical spaces in terms of architecture and other kinds of environmental infrastructure that we can point to and say, oh, that's a really great example of safe space, or this is a really great example of, an inclusive teaching space. Those kinds of spaces are really situated socially, like we talk about them. We make safe spaces in terms of how we engage each other. But in terms of the design of the physical environment and in architecture, we don't have yet, I don't think, at least I'm speaking more about the campus and the infrastructure on campus. We don't have adequate physical infrastructure on our campus that makes distinctive space for disabled persons and our intersectional allies. So I really feel like when Dr. Okanlami was speaking yesterday, he was talking about the alignment between disability, gender, and racial justice. And I feel that those are all part of this massive alignment to really disrupt the architecture of violence. And I mean architecture in terms of both the infrastructure of the city and how the city is made to prioritize certain bodies over other bodies. And so how might we sort of redefine a kind of radical architecture of inclusion? I'm also interested in let's say, the politics of space. And so that's something I bring to the disability studies course, and how we might use design to vivify the politics of space through speculative work. So I'm always interested in how do we take design and sort of drive it into spaces, situations, networks where design usually isn't operating within. And I call that the cryptographic imaginary. That cryptographies is this kind of hybrid term that speaks to cryptography, which is the study of ciphers and codes, and to crypt, which is a colloquialism that's used amongst disabled people to talk about and share our experiences. I'm interested in the process of how design can be used to deinstitutionalize spaces. And that's where I feel really aligned with a lot of Petra's work. Like if we deinstitutionalize spaces, what do those spaces become? How do they catch on? How do they become accessible to other people? So, I think if you're following the 5 takes, I think what we do as a faculty is that we sort of spin disability and inflect it with our own interests. But I hope what you've maybe taken from this is that there's a really diverse range of perspectives that motivate disability scholarship and also our teaching. So let's just pivot really briefly for a bit, just to speak a little bit about the context of disability studies in the university. So, over the past 20 years or so, UMichAccess, the Initiative on Disability Studies, has done a lot of work in terms of knowledge, production, activism, critical disability theory, creative works and performance, and design and disability aesthetics. And I guess I'd be remiss if we didn't mention one of the most prominent scholars in our field, which is Tobin Siebers, a great friend, original founder of UMine's mentor, and he wrote two really important books, which I've always thought the titles of the books are a little bit too heavy, like Disability Theory and Disability Aesthetics. But nonetheless, I think these are really important books in our field. And these are books that you would see virtually on every bibliography and disability studies courses around the country. If you're interested too, if you really want to dive into like recent scholarship on disability studies, there's a great book series through the University of Michigan Press called Corporalities, Discourses of Disability. In that, you can find a number of books that have been published by faculty and scholars across the country and throughout the world, in fact. But I just wanted to say thanks to Tobin Siebers. We miss you, wish you were here. And then maybe Josh, if you could talk just a little bit, there's a current book that's coming out of this series called Sex, Identity, and Aesthetics, which is focused on the work of disability of Tobin Siebers and the work that he's done in disability studies. Do you want to say something about that just briefly?
Sure. This is Josh Kupet speaking again. Just very briefly, in just about 2 or a week and a half, October 14th, this collection of essays will be published by University of Michigan Press. And in this collection, scholars from the University of Michigan who worked with Tobin, we have edited a collection of contemporary scholarship that positions the legacy of Siebers, many important contributions to disability studies, into some new contexts, some of which were anticipated perhaps by Tobin, several of which were not, in order to show the kind of range and sophistication of the thinking that he did regarding disability. And so I'm really excited about it. And there are a lot of really great authors and scholars who will be represented in that book. And we'll have an event for that in the beginning of November.
Great. Thank you. So we can sort of scale back on some of our engagement here, but this prompt, the deep history of disability is traumatic. The practice of disability is contested within the public sphere, and the interplay between pain, disability, and health is complex. And I saw a question in the chat that just came up that maybe Petra, could you address? The question is, use of the word mad to signify a person who identifies as mentally ill is new to me. What is the history of this characterization?
Yes, I'm glad to. Thanks, Robert. I already wrote a response in the Q&A section, but I'm happy to speak to this. So there's a whole area of studies, particularly dominant in Canada, that emerged from grassroots work, and the area is called MAD studies. MAD, the label MAD has been reclaimed as a way to refer to what I normally call also mental health difference, by people who see themselves as psychiatric survivors, as people who've had experiences with the psychiatric system. There's multiple different kinds of languages. And I understand MAD to be a reclamation, mainly to be used by people who identify. And I work a lot in collaboration with MAD artists. Many of you here at the university know that I work very closely with my partner and wife, Stephanie Haidt, who identifies with the label MAD. She's a poet and a dancer and someone who's very active in the disability culture area of MAD reclamation.
And maybe just building on that a little bit. So we know in disability studies over the course of its many kinds of discourses, there's been this tension between the medical model of disability and the so-called social model. And I think a lot of contemporary disability studies discourse has kind of moved on from that binary and into a justice space. But do you think, within our university, given the fact that there's engineers that want to create technologies that support disabled people, or doctors and physicians that want to create new kinds of therapies that support or cure certain types of disabilities, do you think there's an opportunity, and I'm sort of saying this to the entire panel, but also to the larger audience, is there an opportunity to rethink some of those divisions and, I would say a degree of mistrust between like humanities scholarship, the hard sciences, and thinking about ways that we might repair those kinds of divides. Do you think that's at all available in our space?
Well, I think that really touches on a really prevalent, I think, controversy, a live controversy in a lot of our classes that are more culturally geared, but have more professionalizing medical professional students who are trying to enter fields of care work and research. And I actually think that it's a very productive conversation, honestly, because the social model, as many people understand it, is actually insufficient. And so is the medical model. And that something in between, something that acknowledges the inherent facts of a body or mind difference in an individual, at the same time as being able to grasp the social construction of that disability, I think that is a really important kind of space to bring students to. And then to kind of ask, what is equality and what is justice in the context of bodily pain or of an individual who needs help? And that is where really, really interesting conversations can get started. Because it's in disability studies, I think that the question of equality becomes very urgent, very practical, and every day becomes very quotidian. You have to practice equality. It's something that you have to kind of work at. You can't think in terms of these kind of abstract models of individuals who are all equal in body and mind in a kind of liberal a kind of philosophy sense. You actually have to get grounded and understand that people are different. And in that case, what does equality look like? What does care look like? What does radical justice look like in that context? So that's where a lot of the great questions or discussions come up in my classes. But I wanted to kind of also speak really quickly to a question that someone posed about ableist anxiety, which is something that I feel is so universal that it affects everyone. And I just want to harken back to something that Tobin Siebers said. He coined the term the ideology of ability, and he had students kind of come up with what they thought that was in one of his classes and created a kind of bullet point list. The list includes something that I think is really important, which is the maxim: the lesser the ability, the lesser the human being. And this is where the ideology of ability and undoing it can actually promote the mission of diversity, equity, and inclusion for everyone. And that is that, as you mentioned, Robert, the criterion for human exclusion has historically been disability. So if we can kind of pick apart or chip away at the ideology of ability, that the lesser the ability, the lesser the human, we can actually get at the root of what so much inequality has been justified by. Like the justification for so much inequality has been this idea of a difference in ability.
Yeah, thank you. So, if you're a student in the audience listening to this and interested in disability studies, but also thinking about like what's the advantage to get a credential, let's say an undergraduate minor or a graduate certificate or a degree in disability studies. It might be interesting to know, like at University of Delaware, where our colleague Stephanie Kirschbaum teaches, that disability studies is the #1 undergraduate minor. And I also know at OSU, just south of us, the disability studies is the #2 undergraduate minor. And so I'd like to get the panel just to briefly comment on, what do you think is the opportunity space for somebody to get a degree in disability studies, and where might that work go? And I was wondering, Natasha, given your work that's both like in the academy, but also working outside in terms of public activism, if you have some thoughts on that.
Well, I was actually just talking to, so I'm teaching the 580 class that Petra mentioned this semester, and we were talking about the disproportionate impact of the climate crisis on disabled people. And as we know, the climate crisis is a very big and sometimes, oppressive thing to be facing. And the students were just wondering, like, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And I think being able to take what you learn and spread that knowledge to the broader community is one of the easiest ways we can translate activism within academia to broader community activism.
I know, Petra, you have to jump off the call right now, but I just wanted to say thank you so much before you go.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
So the other thing I'd want to just briefly mention, I know we're winding down our time here, is that I think in disability studies, one thing that we do explicitly is we really pay attention to our own mental health and well-being. And I think over the course of the last year and a half, 2 years of the pandemic, systemic racism in our country, and just the stressors of being a student and working hard at your studies, that space can be really stressful. And so I hope that you're picking up, at least in terms of the energy, things that we do in disability studies to kind of lower the activation energy of what it means to be a student. This isn't a space where there's standardized testing and things like that. It's really more based on, project-based, experiential, and kind of tacit learning models. So, we really hope that things that we do in disability studies can challenge mantras like Michigan's use of leaders in the best, which is an absolutely ableist kind of rhetoric, and how might we shift that rhetoric from leaders in the best to just simply doing well, being well, taking care of each other, and doing the good work that we'd like to do. If there's any other questions in the chat, we could catch those now. Josh, did you see anything?
I saw, just to draw attention to, I'm sorry, this is Josh Kupet speaking again, but Stephanie Rosen, one of our allies here at U of M, made a really great point in the chat, talking about the education of students who go into the health professions, right? So, and the incredible value of those students being able to historicize the professions they're entering and understand the ways in which disability has been in some ways central to their foundation and also misrepresented in that foundation. And there was a follow-up to that by Patricia Anderson that was speaking to the ways in which U of M's medical school is attempting to remedy some of that, but also suggesting that at the undergraduate side of things, before students enter medical school, would be maybe a better place to kind of begin sort of doing this education and this work. Speaking to my own experience, I once moonlit a course at University of Toledo's disability studies program, in which most of the students in that room were going into the health professions in some form or fashion. And I found it both a very different experience of teaching than the more theoretical approaches that we've had here at U of M, but also an incredibly rewarding one, because these students were going to soon leave that room and work very closely with disabled people day in, day out. And I saw it as an incredible way to actually positively affect the lives of disabled people as well. And so, as I'd mentioned before, I think that there is a real awareness about the value of thinking through disability at the undergraduate level across a range of fields. And I think that we would probably pretty quickly see some uptake here at U of M, like they see at Delaware, like they see at OSU and other places with disability studies programs.
Yeah, I like a lot about how students from a wide range of degrees, academic units, majors, et cetera, could come into contact with disability studies, and let's say that the political structure of disability, the ethical framework around disability, and take some of that information back into, let's say disciplines that tend to not foreground those kinds of issues. And so that to me is sort of the future job opportunity market. I think if we're demanding a more accessible and inclusive kind of future in terms of workplace and the right to work and an ability to have an impact, that there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for students to do that in a really amazing way. And part of that is, how do we make an anti-ableist, organization? So, in closing, I'll just say briefly, we're seeking student and institutional support to reposition disability culture and disability studies within academic life as a means to disrupt the rhetoric around leaders in the best, ableism presiding over the university. We also want to make space for disability culture. So we're talking about a disability culture center, a physical space on campus where disabled people and our allies and all people, in fact, can come together to learn from each other and to share, different kinds of experiences. And we're really looking forward to how disability studies maybe helps us navigate the near now future with greater access, inclusion, and equity. And we hope that maybe some of the things that you've taken from this is that disability studies really promotes a more plural, we hope a little bit queer and heterogeneous world with greater capacity to hold and respect simultaneity without the collapse of difference, or how we're all intersectional people, and our differences are the things that really make it worthwhile to get up every morning and keep on going and practicing the good work that we do, and also to practice civic space vividly. So thank you so much, for joining us today. Really appreciate the work that everyone did to organize this event, to make it accessible through sign language interpretation and captioning in real time. Thank you to the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to support this. And if you're interested in reaching out to us to follow up with any questions or comments, or just want to learn more about disability studies, you can contact us here at disability-studies@umich.edu, and then there's our individual emails as well. Thank you so much to our panelists, and with that, I think we'll close out today's event and look forward to you joining future events in our symposium. Thank you so much.